You can tell a lot about a man by how still he stands when everyone else expects him to break. The wind moved first, sweeping low across the training grounds in long, dry breaths that carried dust and the faint scent of hot metal, rattling the faded range flags stretched along the perimeter of the cadet field, and in the middle of that wide open space, beneath a sky bleached pale by the afternoon sun, an old man stood with his hands at his sides while a pistol hovered inches from his forehead. The cadet holding it, trying hard to look confident, trying harder not to let his voice crack as he spoke. "You lost, sir, or you just don't follow instructions?" A few of the other cadets laughed, the kind of laughter that comes too fast, too sharp, like they were performing for each other rather than reacting to anything real, their boots grinding lightly against the gravel as they shifted, circling just enough to feel in control, their uniforms crisp, their posture rehearsed, their authority still new enough to taste, and none of them noticed the way the old man's eyes moved, not toward the weapon, not toward the cadet in front of him, but slightly past them, measuring distance, reading space, absorbing everything without reacting to anything, his face calm in a way that didn't invite sympathy, didn't signal fear, didn't even suggest defiance, just a quiet presence that felt out of place in a moment that was trying very hard to become something bigger than it was. The cadet stepped closer, closing the last inch of space as if proximity alone would prove his point. "I asked you a question," he said, louder this time, the edge in his voice sharpened by the attention of his peers, and still the old man said nothing, not because he didn't hear, not because he didn't understand, but because silence, in this moment, was not absence, it was control, the kind of control that doesn't need to announce itself. One of the cadets off to the side pulled out his phone, angling it just enough to catch the scene, already imagining the replay, the story, the version of events where they were the ones in charge, and the wind shifted again, brushing against the old man's worn jacket, revealing for just a second the faint outline of something stitched beneath the fabric, something old, something almost forgotten, and just as quickly hidden again, unnoticed by everyone except one cadet standing farther back, quieter than the rest, his smile fading as he watched not the gun, not the laughter, but the stillness, the kind of stillness that didn't belong here, didn't belong to someone caught off guard, didn't belong to someone out of place, and for a brief second, something unsettled flickered across his expression, a thought he couldn't quite name, while the cadet holding the pistol adjusted his grip, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to betray that this wasn't as comfortable as he wanted it to seem. "Last chance," he said, trying to reclaim the moment, trying to force a reaction, trying to prove something to people who didn't need proof. And in that exact instant, the old man shifted his head, barely a fraction, less than an inch, just enough to change the angle between metal and skin, just enough to show that he was aware, completely aware, and the movement was so small it could have been dismissed as nothing, but it wasn't nothing, not to the one cadet watching closely. Because in that tiny adjustment there was no hesitation, no flinch, no uncertainty, only precision, and something about that precision didn't fit the story they were telling themselves. The laughter thinned, the air tightened, and without raising his voice, without stepping back, without doing anything that could be called dramatic, the old man finally spoke, his voice low, steady, carrying just far enough to be heard. "You're holding that wrong." And for the first time since the moment began, the cadet's confidence faltered, just for a second, just long enough for doubt to slip in where certainty had been, and the wind moved again, quieter now, as if even it was waiting to see what would happen next. The words did not land like a challenge, they landed like a correction, quiet and precise. And for a moment the cadet did not move, his finger easing just slightly along the frame, as if his body understood something his pride had not yet caught up to. "What did you just say?" he asked, forcing a smirk that did not quite settle on his face. The other cadets leaned in, expecting the old man to fold, to apologize, to explain himself, but instead there was only that same stillness, the kind that did not ask for permission to exist. "Your grip," the old man repeated, his eyes finally settling on the weapon for the first time, not with fear, not even with concern, but with the detached clarity of someone observing a detail that mattered more than the situation itself. "Too much tension in your wrist, not enough control in your fingers." The cadet let out a short laugh, louder than necessary. Glancing back at his friends for reinforcement, "You think you are in a position to give advice right now," he said, but his stance shifted anyway, subtle, instinctive, betraying that something about the comment had reached him. The wind swept across the field again, tugging lightly at uniforms and loose gravel, carrying a low hum from the distant motor pool, and somewhere beyond the immediate circle, a drill instructor paused mid-step, his gaze narrowing as he watched the formation from a distance. Not the confrontation itself, but the way it held together, or rather, the way it did not. Back in the circle, one of the cadets stepped closer, emboldened by the silence. "Maybe he used to be something," he said, nudging another with his elbow. "Back when radios had wires and maps were paper." A few chuckles followed, but softer this time, less certain. The old man did not react, did not defend, did not correct. He simply stood, the same measured posture, shoulders relaxed, weight evenly distributed, as if the ground beneath him belonged to him in a way none of them could claim. The cadet with the pistol tilted his head, studying him now, not as a joke, but as a problem he could not quite solve. "You keep talking like you know something," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "So what? You some kind of expert?" The question hung there, heavier than the ones before it, because this time it was not for the audience, it was for himself, and for the first time. The old man answered without hesitation. "No," he said, calm, direct. "I just know what happens when someone holds it like that and expects control." The sentence was simple, but it carried weight in the way it ended, not as a warning, not as a threat, just as a fact, and that made it harder to dismiss. Off to the side, the quiet cadet shifted his stance, his eyes flicking down for a brief second to the old man's hands, noting the absence of tremor, the steadiness that did not match the years etched into his face. And something about that disconnect tightened the air around him. The drill instructor in the distance reached for the radio clipped to his vest, not speaking yet, just touching it, as if confirming it was there, as if preparing for something he could not fully explain. The cadet in front drew a slow breath, adjusting his footing, trying to reclaim the moment that had started to slip. "You are in my training zone," he said, the authority returning to his voice, rehearsed, reinforced. "And right now, you do not have any leverage." The old man's eyes lifted, meeting his directly for the first time, not challenging, not confrontational, just present. "You are right," he said quietly. "I do not need any." And that was when the laughter stopped completely, not because anyone told it to, but because something in the space between them had shifted, something subtle but undeniable, like a line had been drawn that none of them remembered crossing, and none of them were quite sure how to step back from. No one moved, but everything changed, not in a way that could be pointed at or explained, just a subtle tightening of the air as if the space itself had become aware of something the cadets had not yet named. The one holding the pistol felt at first, not fear, not exactly, but a quiet disruption in the certainty he had been leaning on, like a structure that suddenly did not feel as solid beneath his feet, and he shifted again, this time slower, more deliberate, trying to reassert control over a moment that was no longer responding the way it should. "You think this is a game?" he said, his voice lower now, less for the others and more for himself. But the old man did not answer right away, his gaze drifting for a fraction of a second past the cadet's shoulder, not distracted, not disengaged, but tracking something deeper, something that did not belong to the present. And then his eyes returned, steady as before. "No," he said, calm and even. "Games have rules people agree on." The words settled without force, but they carried weight in the way they refused to escalate, refused to compete. And that made them harder to push against. One of the cadets in the back shifted uncomfortably, lowering his phone without realizing it, the moment no longer feeling like something worth recording. Another cleared his throat, glancing toward the edge of the field as if expecting someone to step in. But no one did. Not yet. The drill instructor remained at a distance, radio now in his hand, thumb resting near the button but not pressing it, his eyes locked on the old man, on the posture, on the stillness that did not match any civilian he had ever seen wander onto a training ground. And something old and instinctive stirred in him, something learned long before rank or position. Back in the circle, the cadet in front tightened his jaw, frustration creeping in where confidence had been. "You are out of line," he said, the phrase sounding rehearsed, borrowed from instruction rather than owned through experience. "And you are going to explain why you are here." The old man's expression did not change, but there was a shift so small it could have been missed, a slight adjustment in his shoulders, a redistribution of weight that made him seem less like someone being confronted and more like someone waiting for the right moment to speak. And when he did, his voice remained low, controlled, carrying just enough to reach every ear in the circle. "I am exactly where I was told to be," he said. And the sentence did not sound defensive, did not sound like an excuse. It sounded like a statement that had already been verified somewhere far above this moment. The cadet blinked, just once, processing, rejecting, recalibrating. "By who?" he asked quickly, as if speed could regain the ground he was losing. And for the first time, the old man paused, not because he did not have an answer, but because he was choosing whether it mattered to give it. The wind moved again, lighter now, brushing across the field, carrying the faint crackle of a radio transmission that had not yet been spoken into. The drill instructor's grip tightened slightly around it, his eyes narrowing further, recognition not yet formed, but close, uncomfortably close. And in that suspended moment, the old man finally spoke, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. Someone who does not need to repeat themselves. And that was when the uncertainty became visible, not in words, not in actions, but in the silence that followed, heavier than anything that had been said, stretching just long enough for doubt to take hold in places pride had been standing only seconds before. The silence did not break. It deepened, settling over the group like a weight no one had prepared to carry. And for the first time since the moment began, the cadet holding the pistol felt something unfamiliar press against his confidence. Not fear, not yet, but the clear realization that the situation was no longer behaving according to expectation. His grip tightened again, not out of control, but out of the need to reclaim it. "You are not answering the question," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. But the words lacked the authority they had only moments ago. The old man did not move, did not adjust, did not react to the pressure in front of him. Instead, his eyes shifted slightly, not toward the cadet, but toward the cadet's hand, the placement of his fingers, the angle of his wrist, the way tension had begun to creep in where precision should have remained. And when he spoke, it was not louder, not sharper, just more exact. "You are compensating," he said, and the statement landed in a way the cadet could not immediately dismiss. "Your grip changed when you lost focus." The cadet blinked, caught off guard by the observation. His instinct was to deny it, to laugh it off, to push back. But his body betrayed him before his voice could. His fingers adjusted unconsciously, easing slightly, correcting without permission, and that was when the second cadet, the one who had been watching quietly, took a step forward, not fully into the circle, but close enough to feel the shift, his eyes narrowing as he studied the old man more carefully now, not as an outsider, but as something that did not belong in the category they had assigned him. "Where did you train?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. And it did not sound like a challenge. It sounded like curiosity edged with concern. The others glanced at him, surprised by the change in tone. The cadet with the pistol scoffed, trying to pull the moment back into something familiar. "He did not train anywhere," he said quickly. Too quickly, he wandered onto a restricted field, and now he is trying to act like he belongs. But the words did not land the same way they had before. The energy had shifted too far, and even he could feel it. The old man finally looked at the second cadet. Not long, just long enough to acknowledge the question, and there was something in that look that made the cadet straighten slightly without understanding why. "A long time ago," the old man said, his voice steady, "before you needed to be told what right looked like." The wind moved again, lighter now, brushing across the field with a low whisper that carried the faint crackle of a radio finally coming to life. Off at the edge of the training ground, the drill instructor raised it closer to his mouth, still not speaking, but no longer hesitating, his eyes locked on the old man's posture, on the way he stood, on the way he observed without reacting. And something clicked into place, not a memory, not a name, but a recognition of pattern, of presence, of something that did not need identification to be understood. Back in the circle, the cadet holding the pistol felt the moment slipping further. The control he had been so certain of now fragile, uncertain, and he took a half step closer, as if proximity could force resolution. "You are done talking," he said. But even as he said it, the words sounded thinner, less certain, and the old man's eyes returned to him, calm, unshaken, and for the first time there was a hint of something else. Beneath that calm, not anger, not defiance, but something heavier, something earned. "No," he said quietly. "You just stopped listening." And that was when the radio at the edge of the field finally spoke, a single voice cutting through the air, low, controlled, and unmistakably urgent. The voice on the radio did not shout. It did not need to. It cut clean through the air with a tone that carried authority far beyond volume. "Confirm that position immediately." And the drill instructor's posture changed in an instant, his shoulders tightening, his stance sharpening as if years of instinct had just been switched back on. "Stand by," he replied, his eyes never leaving the old man. And for the first time since the moment began, someone outside the circle was not observing. They were acting. Back in the center, the cadets froze for half a second, just long enough for uncertainty to ripple through them before pride tried to cover it. The one holding the pistol frowned, glancing briefly toward the edge of the field, irritation flashing across his face. "Ignore it," he said quickly, as if dismissing the interruption would restore control, but the timing had already broken something. The rhythm of the confrontation no longer belonged to him. The quiet cadet stepped back slightly now, creating space, his eyes shifting between the old man and the drill instructor, his instincts pulling him in two directions at once, while the others stood caught between following orders and following momentum. The old man remained exactly where he was, unchanged, unaffected, as if the radio call had simply confirmed something he had already known. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying the low static of the open channel, and then the voice returned, sharper this time, more precise. "Do not engage further. I repeat, do not engage." The words hung in the air, unmistakable, undeniable, and for a brief moment, no one spoke, because now there was something they could not ignore, something that came from above them, outside them, beyond their control. The cadet in front felt it press against him, the weight of a directive that did not align with the role he had stepped into. His jaw tightened, his grip shifting again, not aggressive, but uncertain. "We are already engaged," he said under his breath, more to himself than anyone else, trying to reconcile what he was hearing with what he believed. The old man's eyes moved slightly, just enough to acknowledge the shift, and when he spoke, it was quieter than before, almost reflective. "Now you understand," he said, and the sentence did not sound like instruction, it sounded like recognition, as if this moment had been inevitable from the start. The second cadet swallowed, his gaze dropping for a split second to the ground before lifting again, his posture no longer aligned with the others, his confidence replaced by something closer to caution. "Sir," he said, addressing the cadet in front, but not taking his eyes off the old man. "Maybe we should verify." The suggestion was careful, measured, but it broke the unity of the group, and once that fracture appeared, it spread quickly. The cadet with the pistol hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, and in that hesitation, everything shifted, because hesitation meant doubt, and doubt meant the moment was no longer his to control. Off at the edge of the field, the drill instructor pressed the radio firmly now, his voice low but urgent. "I have visual confirmation," he said, and there was a pause on the line, a silence that felt heavier than anything before it, before a new voice came through, older, steadier, carrying a weight that did not need explanation. "Hold your position," it said, and then, after the briefest pause, "We are on our way." And back in the circle, the cadets did not know exactly what that meant, but they felt it, the shift from uncertainty to consequence, the slow realization that whatever they had started was no longer theirs to finish, and the old man, still standing in the same place, finally exhaled, not in relief, not in tension, but in quiet acknowledgement, as if something long delayed had finally begun to arrive. The air did not move the same way anymore. It carried weight now, something unseen but unmistakable pressing down across the training ground, and the cadets felt it without understanding it, the kind of pressure that does not come from a single voice or a single command, but from the realization that something larger has already been set into motion. The one holding the pistol did not lower it. Not yet. But his arm no longer held the same certainty. The alignment was still there, the posture still correct. But the intention behind it had shifted, no longer assertive, no longer dominant, just suspended, waiting for something he could not control. "We are not done here," he said. But the words sounded different now. Thinner, as if they had to travel farther to be believed. The old man did not answer immediately, his gaze drifting past the cadet once more, not dismissing him, not ignoring him, simply seeing beyond him, as if the current moment was only a small part of something already unfolding. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but carried farther. "No," he said. "You already are." And the certainty in that statement did not challenge, did not provoke. It settled, like a conclusion that had been reached long before any of them arrived. The second cadet shifted. Again, stepping back another inch, the distance small but meaningful, his body no longer aligned with the confrontation, his instincts pulling him toward caution, toward observation rather than participation, while the others stood caught in place, their earlier confidence now replaced with a hesitation they could not quite justify. Off at the edge of the field, the drill instructor lowered the radio slightly, not because the call had ended, but because the next part did not require his voice. It required presence, and in the far distance, beyond the low structures and parked vehicles, a shape began to emerge, subtle at first, just the movement of something approaching along the access road, and then clearer, a vehicle, dark, official, moving with a purpose that did not match the casual rhythm of the training ground. The engine sound carried faintly across the open space, steady, controlled, and it changed the atmosphere instantly, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Back in the circle, the cadet with the pistol heard it too, his eyes flicking for a fraction of a second toward the sound before returning to the old man. But that single glance was enough to break the illusion of control he had been holding on to. His grip adjusted again, this time not correcting form, but easing tension, the angle lowering just a fraction, barely noticeable, but no longer aligned with the certainty he had started with. The quiet cadet followed the sound. With his eyes, his breath slowing, his posture shifting from confrontation to awareness. And in that moment, he understood something the others had not yet allowed themselves to accept. This was no longer a training scenario. This was not a misunderstanding. This was something real, something that carried consequences beyond their rank, beyond their assumptions. The wind moved again, carrying the distant hum of the approaching vehicle closer now, more defined, more immediate, and the old man finally moved, not stepping back, not stepping forward, just a slight shift of his shoulders, a release of tension that had never been visible until it eased, and his eyes returned to the cadet in front of him, steady, calm, and final. "You should lower that," he said, not as a command, not as a request, but as a statement of what was about to happen regardless of what the cadet chose. And for the first time since the moment began, the cadet hesitated long enough for everyone to see it, not hidden, not disguised, just there, clear and undeniable. The realization that whatever he had believed about this situation was no longer true, and in the distance, the vehicle did not slow. The vehicle did not slow as it approached the edge of the training ground, its movement steady and deliberate, cutting a straight line through the dust and heat, as if everything in its path had already been cleared before it arrived. And that alone was enough to shift the balance of the moment completely, because now the cadets were no longer just reacting to the old man. They were reacting to something else, something official, something that did not belong to their authority. The engine noise grew louder, no longer distant, no longer ignorable, and with it came a pressure that settled into their posture, into their breathing, into the way their eyes moved without permission toward the approaching presence. The cadet holding the pistol felt it first in his grip, the tension no longer sustainable, his wrist loosening slightly, the angle dropping another fraction, not enough to be obvious, but enough to be real, and he knew it. Even if he did not say it. "Hold position," he muttered, more to himself than to the others, but the words lacked conviction, because the moment had already moved beyond him. The second cadet stepped back again, this time fully breaking from the circle, his arms lowering to his sides, his attention no longer divided, now fixed entirely on the vehicle as it came to a controlled stop just beyond the boundary line. The doors did not open immediately, and that pause, that brief stillness, carried more authority than any shouted command could have. The drill instructor straightened fully now, his posture snapping into something sharper, older, instinctive, his radio lowered but still in hand, his eyes locked on the vehicle with recognition that had finally taken form, and back in the circle, the old man did not turn to look. Not yet. His gaze remained on the cadet in front of him, steady, unbroken, as if the arrival had already been accounted for, as if it was simply the next step in something that had been set long before any of them understood it. "This is your last moment to choose correctly," he said quietly, and the words did not carry threat, did not carry urgency. They carried certainty, the kind that does not need to be repeated. The cadet's jaw tightened, his pride pushing against the pressure building around him, but it was no longer enough to hold the line. His arm lowered another inch, the barrel no longer aligned, no longer steady, and in that small movement, everything changed, because once control begins to slip, it does not return the same way. The others saw it, felt it. The shift from command to uncertainty, and none of them stepped in to correct it, because none of them were sure they had the authority to do so anymore. The vehicle doors opened then, slow, deliberate, and the sound cut through the air like a signal, the kind that does not need explanation. One figure stepped out first, then another, their movements controlled, measured, carrying a presence that did not need introduction. And even before they spoke, before they moved closer, the drill instructor's stance locked completely, his hand snapping to a position of respect without hesitation, without thought. And that single action was enough to send a clear, unmistakable message through every cadet on the field. Something was very wrong. And back in the circle, the cadet with the pistol finally lowered it completely, not as an act of surrender, not as a decision, but because he no longer had the certainty required to hold it in place, his arm dropping to his side as if guided by something beyond his control. And in that moment, the old man exhaled softly, not in relief, not in victory, but in acknowledgement, as if the outcome had never been in question, only the timing. And now, finally, the moment had caught up to the truth. No one spoke when the figures stepped forward, because speech no longer belonged to this moment. Authority did, and it moved across the training ground with a weight that did not need explanation. The first man walked with a measured pace, his uniform immaculate, his presence unmistakable even before rank could be seen, and behind him another followed, equally composed, equally precise, their eyes scanning not the field, not the formation, but the space where the imbalance had occurred. And when their gaze settled on the old man, everything aligned, not in surprise, not in confusion, but in immediate recognition. The drill instructor did not wait, his posture locking fully as his hand rose in a sharp, practiced motion, the kind that comes from years of repetition and deeper understanding. And that single gesture rippled outward, because the cadets saw it. And when they saw it, they understood something had already been decided long before they were aware of it. The lead officer stopped just short of the circle, his eyes briefly passing over the cadets, not lingering, not judging, simply acknowledging their presence as secondary to something far more important. And then he turned fully toward the old man, his expression shifting, not into familiarity, but into respect so immediate it erased everything that had happened before. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, controlled, carrying across the field without force. And in that single word, the entire structure of the moment collapsed and rebuilt itself in a completely different order. The cadet, who had held the pistol, felt it like a physical shift, the ground beneath his certainty gone, replaced with something he could not stand on, his arm now fully lowered, his posture no longer aligned with command, his eyes moving between the officer and the old man, as if trying to reconcile two realities that did not match. The second cadet stood still, his earlier instinct now confirmed, his silence no longer uncertainty, but understanding. The old man finally turned then, slowly, deliberately, acknowledging the presence that had arrived, his posture unchanged, his expression steady. But there was a subtle shift in the air around him, not because he had gained authority, but because the authority had finally become visible to everyone else. The officer stepped closer, not rushed, not hesitant, each movement controlled, precise, and when he stopped in front of the old man, there was no hesitation, no doubt, only clarity. "We apologize for the delay," he said, and the words were not formal, not routine. They carried weight, the kind that comes from understanding exactly who is standing in front of you, and why that matters. The cadets froze completely now, because apology was not something they had expected, not from this level, not directed here, not in this situation. And that single shift shattered whatever remained of their earlier assumptions. The officer's gaze moved briefly to the cadet who had initiated the confrontation, not harsh, not aggressive, but firm in a way that did not allow misinterpretation, and then it returned to the old man. Because the focus of this moment had never changed. It had only been misunderstood. "We will take it from here," he said quietly, and the statement did not remove control, it redefined it. And in that redefinition, the cadets understood something they had not been trained for, not directly, not in any manual. That authority is not always visible, not always announced, but when it reveals itself, it does not argue. It does not explain, it simply stands, and everything else adjusts around it. And in the center of that realization, the old man gave the smallest nod, not in acknowledgement of rank, not in submission, but in quiet agreement, as if this outcome had always been inevitable, and now, finally, everyone else could see it. The field did not return to normal when the moment ended. It settled into something quieter, heavier, as if the ground itself had absorbed what had just happened and was not ready to let it go. The cadets stood in place, no longer a formation, no longer a unit moving with shared confidence, but individuals caught inside their own realization, each one replaying the same sequence in their mind, searching for the exact second where everything shifted and not finding it, because the shift had not been a moment. It had been a presence they failed to recognize. The officer did not raise his voice, did not issue a reprimand in front of everyone. He did not need to. His silence carried more weight than any correction could, and when he finally turned slightly toward the cadets, it was not anger in his expression. It was something sharper, something more precise. "You will remember this," he said, calm, controlled, each word placed exactly where it needed to be, not because of what you did, but because of what you failed to see. And that sentence settled deeper than any shouted order ever could, because it did not target their action, it targeted their awareness, and that was harder to defend, harder to dismiss. The cadet who had held the pistol did not speak, his posture no longer rigid, no longer certain, his eyes fixed forward but unfocused, as if the version of himself from minutes ago no longer matched the one standing here now. The second cadet lowered his gaze briefly, not out of shame alone, but out of recognition, the quiet understanding that instinct had tried to warn him, and he had not trusted it soon enough. The drill instructor stepped forward then, not quickly, not aggressively, but with the steady control of someone who understood exactly what had just taken place, and he did not look at the cadets first. He looked at the old man, his posture aligning, his expression firm but respectful, and for a brief moment, there was no rank between them, only acknowledgement, the kind earned through time, through experience, through things that are never written down. The old man returned the look with the same calm he had held from the beginning, unchanged, unaffected, as if nothing in this moment had altered who he was, because it had not. It had only revealed it. The officer stepped aside slightly, creating space, not directing, not commanding, simply allowing the path forward to exist, and the old man began to walk, not hurried, not slowed, just steady, each step measured, grounded, as he moved past the cadets without a word, without a glance, because nothing needed to be added to what they had already learned. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying the quiet sound of gravel beneath his steps, and as he passed, the cadets felt it, not fear, not intimidation, but something deeper, something that settled into memory. The understanding that presence does not need volume, that authority does not need to be proven, that experience does not announce itself, it waits, and when the moment comes, it does not argue, it does not compete, it simply stands, and everything else falls into place around it. The old man reached the edge of the field, the vehicle waiting, the door already open, and he paused for just a fraction of a second, not to look back, not to reflect, but simply to exist in the space between what had happened and what would come next. And then he stepped forward, disappearing into the quiet. Continuation of a life that had never needed recognition to hold its weight. And behind him, the field remained still, the lesson complete, not spoken, not written, but understood, because some things do not need to be taught loudly to be remembered forever. They only need to be experienced once, in silence.